and welcome back to another episode of ESPC's First Timers Club. I'm Megan, and today we are talking all about how to make an offer on a property. So if you have viewed a property, you've fallen in love with it and you're ready to call it home, the first step you need to take is to get in touch with a solicitor and make an offer on your property. So today I'm speaking to Hannah Gaddie, a solicitor from ESPC member firm Gillespie Macandrew, and in the episode we're going to chat through everything from what is a closing date, what is a note of interest, and everything you'll need to do to be in the best position possible to make an offer. So without further ado, I'm going to pass you over to my chat with Hannah. Hannah, thanks so much for coming on to speak to first-time buyers. So this episode is all about making an offer. So we've had episodes in the past about how to view a property and find a solicitor and things, but if a first-time buyer is heading away to view a property, what's the best way they can prepare in advance of that so that once, if they view it and they like it, they're in the best position possible to make an offer?
Yeah, so I think you've probably heard us speak about this before, but always have a solicitor in place beforehand. Yeah. It makes it easier for the first-time buyer, and for us it means you can start to build that relationship right from the start. So, whether it's getting some quotes from ESPC solicitor estate agents, get in touch with them, find one you can trust, and then you've got that relationship beginning. So solicitor, absolutely. Another thing is a good mortgage broker as well. Get one in place so you know your affordability, making sure that that property that you're going to view is actually one that you could realistically afford to put an offer in. Mm-hmm. That's a big one. You don't want to fall in love with a property and then realise last minute it's maybe perhaps out of your budget. So definitely solicitor and mortgage broker. In terms of practical things, I would say to the first time buyer, look at the home report, the property questionnaire, have a look at the area if there's any sort of questions that they want to ask the seller, and just be as prepared as possible going into the viewing.
Yeah, no, that's great advice. And so once a first time buyer's viewed the property, they've fallen in love with it, they decide they want to make that offer, what is the first step that they do to make an offer?
So get in touch with your solicitor, straight after the viewing. Yeah. If you've been in touch with them beforehand, obviously we'll know exactly where the property is. Maybe we've already looked at the home report. If we haven't, then that's our chance to do that and chat it through with you. At that point, we'll also speak to the estate agent to find out how long the property's been on the market for. Is there any other interest, upcoming viewings, so we can advise the best way forward. It might be no one else is interested, so you can put in an early offer. But we would always chat through that specific property with you, because obviously it's their first time and they have no idea, but we do this daily, so we're there to help.
Yeah, absolutely. So you mentioned a note of interest there. So what is a note of interest, if anyone listening doesn't know what that is, and when would you put in a note of interest?
So a note of interest is essentially when the solicitor phones up the estate agent and sort of puts a bit of a marker down. It's just saying to the seller, look, I am interested. It can be seen sometimes as an intention to offer, but you absolutely don't have to offer. Your name just goes on the estate agent's file, and if anything changes with the property, if a closing date's set, which I think we'll go on to, then we would be informed as your solicitor. So yeah, it's a really good way of, if perhaps the first time buyer isn't sure whether or not they want to offer, it's just putting your marker down, and then seeing what happens. I think it's important to say as well though that just because you know interest doesn't mean someone else can't come along and offer. It's not necessarily giving you the absolute certainty that you will be able to make an offer, but maybe it just buys you a little more time. Maybe you want to go and view the property again. So it's just maybe thinking to the seller, yes, I am interested. I may want to offer going forward.
Yeah, and there's no obligation for that seller to, if they have had an offer, they don't have to let you know that's happened.
They don't, unfortunately. They're supposed to, we'd like them to, but it doesn't always happen. So yeah, we always say to clients, obviously you can note interest. Maybe if there's already been a couple of notes, it's likely a closing date might be set. But yeah, if a first-time buyer is super keen, then I'd always say, submit your offer. There's no guarantee that property will hang around and wait for you. I suppose on the flip side as well, if you note interest, you don't have to submit an offer going forward. It might be you see another property and you want to withdraw your note of interest. That's completely fine. It's non-binding and you can just sort of put one in, take it out. It's totally up to you.
Perfect. And in terms of when someone's engaging with a solicitor, what kind of documentation do they need to have? Do they need to have that in place before they make an offer?
Yes, that's the really boring part of the process, unfortunately. So because we're so heavily bound by compliance nowadays, we have to have all this in place before we submit an offer. So typically we have to go through, get your ID, source of wealth, source of funding. So it's really important that the first time buyer gets in touch nice and early. We can get all that out the way, and then we can really focus on the property. So it's things, you'd have to give your mortgage broker the same things, but ID, bank statements, pay slips, just essentially so we can show that you have that money, you're able to make the offer. And yeah, as I say, unfortunately we do need all that in place beforehand. As well, with first time buyers, if you're getting like a gifted deposit from parents or family, we would have to do the anti-money laundering checks on that family member too. So it can be quite a lengthy, cumbersome process. We know it's annoying for clients, but we just have to do it. So yeah, best bit of advice is get that out the way nice and early.
Yeah, no, absolutely. A bit of a necessary evil.
Yeah.
So in terms of making an offer, how do you make an offer? What happens on your side of things? What's that process like?
So we will have spoken to the client, the first time buyer, just about sort of the market. We'll have looked on ESPC Members Hub to look at sort of recent sales, had a discussion with the client about what sort of the best level to pitch an offer is. If it's not at closing date, we would phone the estate agent and submit that offer verbally over the phone. We would obviously explain the client's position, first time buyer, whether they're getting a mortgage, and if they've got their agreement in principle in place, and then the estate agent will take that offer to the seller, and you know, it might be it's accepted, it might be there's a bit of negotiation, but it's all done verbally at the start. And you know, if the seller tries to push you up a bit, we would then speak to the client and say, look, are you happy to increase it a bit? Do you want to hold off just now? So yeah, all on the phone initially, but keeping the first time buyer updated as well.
Yeah. And how fast is that process? Is it just as quickly as you mentioned, or can it take a few days?
It really depends, but I'd say more often than not, it's pretty fast. You know, it can be a client can view in the morning, get in touch, submit an offer, and by the end of the day, the offer is accepted. So it's really fast paced. It can be quite overwhelming at times, so that's why, you know, we'll chat you through everything. But I think it's good as well that it's quick, because you're not sort of hanging on for ages. I think that's the worst.
Yeah.
It does happen. Maybe the seller, there might be a few people that own the property. Maybe the seller's out of the country and they're not easily to get a hold of. But yeah, it's normally pretty quick that it happens.
Yeah, absolutely. And so, yeah, you mentioned closing date. So I don't know if you'd be able to just chat us through what is a closing date and what happens at that.
So a closing date is essentially when there might be a few interested parties and the seller invites all of those parties to submit an offer on a certain day at a certain time. So typically it's midday, can be any day of the week, but it's usually at 12 o'clock. And what that means is that the first time buyer should get in touch with their solicitor and have the offer ready to go the morning of the closing date. And essentially that is the one chance that person has to offer for that property. We get asked quite a lot, if the offer is not accepted, can we then increase it? No, I'm afraid not. It's your best and final offer, so you really have to throw everything at it if you are keen. Sadly for first time buyers, a closing date can be quite competitive, so we'll try and avoid that where we can.
Yeah, no, absolutely. And in terms of making an offer, obviously it's to do with like how much money you want to put down, but can you put in clauses in your offer, such as like including like blinds and curtains that are in with the property, or white goods and things like that? Yeah,
absolutely. So we would always chat that through with the client before offering. The sort of default position is usually everything in the sales particulars is included in the price, and quite often that will mention like the curtains, blinds, white goods if they're integrated, things like that. But if there's anything specific that you would like, then we would put that as a condition of the offer, just so there's no sort of discussions later down the line about was this included, was it not. It's best to make it clear at the outset as to what you'd like included.
Yeah, no, absolutely, because I know there's sometimes can be like special bits of furniture that might be a bit of a nightmare for the seller to move out, so they just include that in the price as well. So
yeah, absolutely, it can work both ways. The seller maybe wants to leave everything. Sometimes they're happy to include everything in the price. Sometimes maybe the purchaser will pay a wee bit more for all the furniture. It's sort of case specific, but yeah, absolutely best to just raise that at the start.
Perfect. And so what happens if you make an offer but it is sadly rejected? what is that process like?
So sort of two situations. If it was rejected just at the start as a verbal offer, we can try and find out why. Is it just that it's too early for the seller to accept an offer? Maybe the property's only just gone on the market. Is the offer too low? Perhaps there's room to negotiate. At that point, it might be worth just submitting a note of interest and maybe waiting to see what happens. So yeah, that's not necessarily the end of the road for that property, but just maybe not right then. If an offer is rejected at a closing date, then usually that is that for that property, sadly. It can be very disheartening because, you know, they've built it up, submitted your best offer, you've given it everything, and then you're told it's still not enough. We will always ask an estate agent to keep our details on file for a property if the offer's unsuccessful, particularly if they were placed second or third. It's quite unusual in Scotland for sales to fall through, but it does happen. So then if that was the case, we'd ask them to get back in touch further down the line and see if you know, we're still interested. But yeah, it is disappointing.
Yeah, absolutely. And then on the flip side, obviously the best case scenario is you put in an offer and it gets accepted. What happens after it's accepted?
Yeah, so I know it can be a bit overwhelming for clients. I was there myself 6 months ago. Our first offer got accepted, so you don't always take everything in, but the one thing I would say that first time buyers have to do once the offer is accepted is get the mortgage application sorted. So just get back in touch with your broker and just say, look, the offer's been accepted, can we start to progress the full application? Your broker will deal with that side for you, and then from our perspective, you know, we'll wait on the formal written acceptance to the offer coming in. We'll get the title deeds in and start the conveyancing process. It can take a couple of weeks for that to happen, so don't be alarmed is the one thing I'd say. If you don't hear from your solicitor straight away and you think what's happening, it's totally normal. It doesn't mean there's any issues. It just takes a bit of time for the selling solicitor to speak to the seller and progress the next stage. So yeah, very exciting, but definitely just get in touch with your mortgage broker and then leave the rest to us.
Perfect. Well, thank you so much, Hannah. Is there anything else you would want to say just as advice? I know you're a recent first-time buyer too.
Yeah, I think just don't be disheartened by it. I would say the market can be tough, particularly for first-time buyers. But honestly, what's for you won't go by you. We missed out at a closing date for our first offer and I was devastated. But it turns out it was the best thing. You know, we found another property that we love, and I'm actually really glad the first offer wasn't accepted. So just if your offer is rejected, just get out there, keep looking. The right one will come up. There's so many, so just keep at it, I would say.
Yeah, no, absolutely. I think that's a great place to end. So thank you so much.
No problem. Thank you for having me.
Thank you so much for listening to this week's episode of ESPC's First Timers Club. If you have any questions about anything we've discussed on this episode or any of our previous episodes, please feel free to get in touch with us. If you're listening along on Spotify or Apple Podcasts, please send us an email at marketing@espc.com. Or if you're watching us on YouTube, you can leave us a comment below. Otherwise, I'll be back again next week with another episode of ESPC's First Timers Club. Bye!